Before we start, you have to download a Blender Experimental. Go to download Blender and Blender Experimental and download Blender 0.1 Alpha. After you download, it's a zip file, unzip it, enter inside the folder and open Blender. If you downloaded the Blender file, open it from here. Search like that. If you open the file from Gumroad with the current Blender, that's what will happen. So you have to download the Blender 4.1. Okay, let's get started. First, delete the default cube and add a curve. Add a new geometry node. Add a curve to mesh node. Add a curve line. And this will be our profile for this curve. Make it -0.5 at the start and the end 0.5 in the y direction. Add a set curve normal node, and with this node we can specify a normal direction for our curve. In the current Blender, you have only two options, minimum twist and Z up, but in 4.1 we have this third option. We can set it however we like. So the normal here, it's point to the Z direction. You will notice this mesh is pointing up, facing up the Z direction. If I change it to the X direction, you will find that curve is trying to face the X direction. So if I rotate it like that, it will face the X direction. And the same thing for the Y direction. So how that can be useful? With this way, we can make this mesh face the camera. In the vector math, when we subtract a vector from a vector, we will create a new vector starting from one to the other. For example, we have this vector and this another vector. When we subtract this one from that one, we will create a new vector. It starts from this and goes towards this one. And that's exactly what we need to do to make the normal of that curve point towards the camera. So every curve consists from a control point, like that. When you subtract its position from the position of the camera, we will create a vector that points toward the camera. So we will grab the camera from the outliner like this, and set it to relative, add a vector math node, add a position node, subtract the position from the location of the camera, and connect it to the normal. And let's see. Press number 0, so you are inside the camera. Here, in the view, you can look the camera to the view. And now you can rotate, and the camera also will rotate. You can assign it as a shortcut, right-click, like that. And you can press Q, and you'll find it in the quick favorite like that. So, when I rotate the camera like this is geometry will always face the camera. And that's exactly what we want. And this option is just only possible in the new version of Blender 4.1 Alpha. The next thing that we need to do is to add a texture on this mesh. To be able to do that, we have to assign a UV map for this mesh. We can do that by spline parameter node. A spline parameter node gives you a factor, and this factor, it gives you a gradient starting from 0 towards 1. 0 from the first of the curve and 1 in the end of the curve. And we do have another one, this length. It gives you 0 from the beginning of the curve, and it gives you the length in the end of the curve. For example, if this curve like 5 meters, it will start from 0 and ends to 5. But we cannot use this after we've converted this curve to mesh, because it's now a different geometry. So we need to capture this information before we do this operation. So search for capture attribute node, and we will capture the length of the curve like that, And now we can see it starts from 0 and ends to the length of the curve. And we will add another capture attribute for the profile. And this is how it looks. For the profile, I just captured the factor. Since the profile is a constant, we don't need to capture the length. But the original curve itself, it can be a several curve, and each of them have a different length. So that's why we need to capture the length of these curves. When we add a combine x, y, z and connect this one to the x and the other one to the y, we'll get a UV map. And now we can store this information in a stored named attribute, switch it to vector, and since it's a UV map, we have to change it from point to face corner and connect this vector to it. And we need to give it a name so we can call it back in the shader editor. My advice for you, don't make it UV in a small letter like that, because this, it will work fine in easy, but it will not work in cycles. So change it to something different. I will make it GN UV, geometry node UV. You can change the radius of the curve when you enter the edit mode from here. But I want to make it procedural, so we do have a set radius node, and we can control how the radius looks from the geometry node. And I will use spline parameter to control it like that. And if I add a color ramp, I can control how the start and the end looks. But nothing will appear because we have just only 2 control points subdivided. Or you can add a resample node. And this allows you to set a specific number of control points for every curve. I will make it by the length. So every 0.01, it will add a control point. And to make this curve a little bit more smoother, I will add set spline type and switch it to nerves. But of course it will add too much of geometry, so we need to resample it again back like that. The first sample I just made it like 0.5 and the second one 0.01. The next thing that I will do is to add an noise texture and animate this curve, this mesh. So add a set position node, noise texture, vector mass, subtract 0.5 from the noise texture. That's because the noise texture, it gives you values from 0 to 1. But we need to make the start of these values from negative 0.5 to 0.5 and connect it to the offset. If we muted this subtract, you will see it's moved from the position. That's why we need to subtract it from 0.5. Duplicate this vector mass and switch it to scale. And from this scale, we can control how much the strength of this noise. Here, I want it to be strong at the end of the curve and weaker in the beginning of the curve. So I'll just add another capture attribute here, and I'll capture the factor, and I'll connect this one to the scale. Currently, we have too much of noise, so I'll set it to 1 and everything to 0. To animate this noise, add a scene time node, switch this to 4D, and connect the second to the W value. So when I play the animation, it will move like that. That's all what we need to do for the geometry node part. So let's go to the shading tab. But before we go to the shading tab, we have to assign a material for this mesh. So search for set material and add this default material. Here in the shading tab, we will modify the material that we added and search for attribute node and write the name of the stored attribute for the UV that we made. Delete this principal BSDF, we don't need it. And we should have something looks like that. Add a noise texture, add color lamp. To animate this noise, we need to add the vector mass. When I add to the X, it will move like that in the X direction. So to make it animate by time, add a value node and write this expression. Hash frame divided by 6 for now. And connect and add a combine XYZ node connected to the X and play the animation. And this is how it works. But it goes in the wrong direction. We need it to go in the opposite direction. So we'll switch it from add to subtract. Currently it's a little bit too fast, so we'll change it to divide by 12. Add a math node, switch it to divide, and connect this color ramp in the second input, and the first input, make it like 0.01. And it will give you this very interesting gradient. You can control how it looks by adding a multiply node, and a power. These values are very high. When you go to render here and enable bloom, you will notice that. So we have to clamp this value. So search for clamp node, and we need to duplicate this. The first one, it will be from 0 to 1, and the second one, it will be 0 to 100. And then add emission shader, connect that 100 to the strength of the emission, and add a transparent BSDF, add a mix shader, the transparent in the first socket, and the emission in the second socket. And that one, with a max of 1, connected to the factor. Currently, nothing has happened. That's because we are in Eevee. And because we are in Eevee, we have to go to material properties here and change the blend mode from opaque to alpha blend. And now it's transparent. But when you go to render properties like that and you add a plane, you will notice that the whole geometry is casting a shadow. So the shadow mode from opaque, just change it to alpha hashed, and it works. The next thing I will do is to duplicate this mix shader and transparent BSDF like that. And I need to make this effect fades when boundary parts. So I will add another attribute node like that. Add a separate XYZ. And we need to separate the Y dimension. Add a color ramp, make the start black and the end also black. And connect this to the mix factor, and it will mix between the transparent and this mix shader. So everything looks fine right now, and you can from here change the color like that. In the beginning of this curve, we will notice that there's some sort of distortion. So go back to geometry node. For this curve line, add a resample node, and this will make it a little bit smoother. You don't need to this higher number, just 0.2, 0.3 works. Back in the shading tab, we can make this noise texture a little bit more interesting by duplicating it and add a mix RGB node, change it to linear light, and we're going to distort this UV before it goes to see the noise texture. And don't forget to connect the subtract here like that. This is way too big. I will change the scale to 1 and play with the parameter however you like until you get the shapes that you like. And I will add another subtract also here to add more variations. And now we can duplicate all of this if you enable node wrangler add-on, you can press Ctrl-Shift-D and it will preserve this connection like that. And add another mix shader to mix between these two effects. And now we can change this one to something different. Something that you will notice when you animate these textures, they all have the same look. So to add a variation for every spline, we need to assign a random value for each spline from the geometry node. So just add the store name attribute here, like that, and switch it to float, delete this one. We're gonna assign it for the splines and search for random, connect the random to the value, and change the max to like for 100, and name this attribute however you like. In this case, I will call it random, and back in the shader editor, duplicate this one, write random, and connect it to the Y direction. As soon as you do that, every spline should have a different texture than the other one. And that's it for this tutorial. It's very simple, nothing is difficult about it. Give it a like, subscribe, and I see you in the next one.